New Zealand and Australia are two separate countries at opposite ends of the earth. They share a common ancestry as British colonies and have a lot in common. So why did New Zealand refuse to join Australia? And today we're going to look at how two similar countries ended up on opposite sides of the Tasman Sea. If you enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. I'm your host. Perhaps the most important factor keeping these two nations apart is the amount of ocean that separates them. 4. New Zealand's independent identity. The way that New Zealand dealt with its indigenous people compared to Australia is also worth mentioning. In the early 1900s, New Zealand was given the option of joining Australia. However, after much debate and discussion, the people of New Zealand voted to remain independent. Although they shared a lot of similarities with Australia, the New Zealanders felt that they were better off as their own country. Ultimately, the decision came down to a simple majority, with 58% voting against joining Australia and 42% in favor. This was a very close vote, and it really could have gone either way. However, in the end, the desire for independence won out, and New Zealand remained a sovereign nation. From the beginning, the British colonial government in New Zealand had much better relations with the Maori than the Australian government had with the Aboriginal people. Thank you so much for watching. I've been your host. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming videos. See you next time. It's a Treaty of Waitangi, signed in 1840. Recognized the Maori as the owners of the land and guaranteed them certain rights, while the Australian government took a very different approach, believing that the Aboriginal people were too primitive to have any kind of claim to the land. This difference in treatment is significant because it led to a much greater sense of goodwill between the New Zealand government and the Maori, which helped to keep the peace and stability in the country. Meanwhile, in Australia, the Aboriginal people were subjected to forced assimilation policies, and their cultures and traditions were suppressed. This is in stark contrast to New Zealand's approach, and it's likely that this difference in treatment played a role in the decision to keep the two colonies separate. The relationship between the government and the Maori in New Zealand was so good that in 2019, Jacinda Ardern became the first head of state to apologize for the New Zealand government's past mistreatment of the Maori. Australia, on the other hand, has yet to formally apologize for its treatment of the Aboriginal people. By the end of the 19th century, New Zealand had developed a strong sense of identity separate from its larger neighbor. Unlike Australia, which was largely seen as a penal colony for many years, New Zealand saw itself as a place full of opportunity and adventure. With beautiful scenery and a growing economy, there was no real desire among the population to be ruled over by another country. In fact, the opposite was true. New Zealanders were very proud of their country and wanted to see it thrive as an independent nation. This feeling of independence was only bolstered by the actions of their politicians, who were always looking out for the best interests of New Zealand. For example, in 1879, New Zealand became the first self-governing British colony to introduce universal suffrage. Granting voting rights to all adult citizens regardless of gender. Australia would not follow suit until 1902, and it wasn't until 1918 that all Australian states had adopted universal suffrage. This desire for independence led the New Zealanders to vote against joining Australia, when the issue was put to a referendum in 1901, and it remains a source of national pride for New Zealanders to this day. At their closest point, the two countries are still 2,000 kilometers away from one another. This is an enormous distance, and during the late 1800s and early 1900s, when discussions about unification were taking place, there was no real way to bridge this divide. There were no airplanes, only boats, or, if you're lucky, a very long train ride to the nearest port, followed by a boat, followed by another very long train ride. This distance is also part of the reason that the British never really pushed for uniting the two colonies. After all, it would be hard enough to rule over two colonies that were much closer to one another. But adding a third one so far away would just make it too difficult, not to mention the travel time to get there. And once the colonies did gain independence, this distance was only emphasized further. Because of this, communication between the two was slow, and any desire to unite was quickly forgotten. New Zealand and Australia both started out life as British colonies. New Zealand and Australia also share another key piece of history. Their time fighting alongside each other in World War I, most notably at Gallipoli. It was an extremely bloody campaign for both sides, and has become something of a shared myth in both countries. In fact, the Anzac legend is still kept alive by the Returned Services Association in both countries, who hold dawn services every April to remember those lost at Gallipoli. This is important to remember because this shared history created a sense of brotherhood between the two nations, which may have made it more likely for the two to work together militarily in the future. But this shared history would not be enough to overcome the other factors keeping the two apart. The first European settlers arrived in Australia in 1788, and the first British colony was established in New Zealand in 1840. As such, they inherited many of the same things from Britain. They both adopted the British system of law and courts. They both developed along similar political lines and were both strongly influenced by British culture. However, it was not this shared past that would keep them divided. Starting off with No. 1. Shared colonial roots. Moving on to number 2. Anzac Brotherhood. Now moving on to No. 3. Geographic divide. No. Number 5. Different indigenous relations. Finally, number 6. Final political decision. If you want to learn more about the topic, check out the additional resources.